Well, the applause you hear is for the folk of Dalkeith turning out to the 34th We Are a Book meeting around Scotland. Now, as I was coming into Dalkeith tonight, I saw a rainbow. And I thought to myself, well, the only people who are going to find a crock of gold today are those who are earning 200,000. Because after the Chancellor's budget, they'll be £5,000 a year better off. Of course, if you're earning 20,000, then it's less than £200. And that £200 is about 1/6 of the increase in fuel bills, even after the 2,500 cap. So what better day than this to illustrate why Scotland needs to get out from under the Westminster system, needs to put an end to the gross inequalities and take charge of our own destiny.
So many thanks for coming along this evening. The event was advertised as Alec as well as Tommy Sheridan, but Tommy's had to cancel at the last minute due to illness. So we've got Eva Comrie here, who's stepped into the breach. So the format this evening will run Eva will speak, Alec will speak, and if we have enough time at the end of the evening, we can take questions from the audience. And this is, it's really important that people discuss the issue of independence and its relevance to the country in this day and age. So when we're asked why we should continue to campaign for independence, we need to only remind ourselves that individuals and families in Scotland increasingly face not only a cost of living crisis, but the cost of surviving. Last week, the Herald newspaper, through a Freedom of Information request, revealed that thousands of Scottish children are being treated for malnutrition in Scotland's hospitals. You've got to ask yourself, what's going on here? This winter, millions face the prospect of not being able to heat their homes. Indeed, we may well have reached a tipping point when the need for independence has never been clearer than it is today. This is not just a cost of living crisis. We have two crises in Scotland, a humanitarian crisis in an energy-rich Scotland where people can't afford to heat their homes, and a greed crisis where the wealth of Scotland is transmitted directly to the UK Treasury. Unfortunately, many of our politicians seem content to sit comfortably on their fat salaries, while their constituents freeze and struggle to feed their families in the looming crisis. The people of Scotland want a better, fairer society and deserve better than this. Therefore, we campaign for independence. Thank you. So I'll just pass across to Eva.
Thank you very much. I'm the Equalities Convener of the Alba Party, and today particularly that word equality has never been more important or more significant. I left school in 1980, just a year after Thatcher was first elected, so I have a long and strong memory of the darkest days of Thatcherism, and I feel a terrible sense of dread and awe that Trussonomics are really going to be Thatcher on speed. And today I was as astounded as everybody else here to understand and listen to the announcements from the Chancellor to the effect of a reverse Robin Hood strategy. Most of you will remember Alan Bastard, played by Rick Mail. That's where we are. So we're robbing from the poor to give to the rich. Now, I don't consider myself a politician, I'm a lawyer, but I joined Alba last year, in part because it was led by the greatest politician that Scotland has seen in modern times, but also because I knew then, and we all know today, that the need and the necessity for Scottish independence has never been more stark. Ours is as we know, an energy-rich country brimming with potential in terms of all of our industries. We didn't get an oil fund, we appear not yet to have a wind fund, and our people are hungry, our people are starving, our people are going to be cold this winter, and as Kevin Bridges got stick for saying last week, but he was right when he said it, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth will not be the only old lady to die in the UK this year. And the sadness is that there will be old ladies in Scotland tonight, hungry and cold and scared of what the future may hold. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was in George Square in Glasgow for what was referred to as a recovery event. It was a commemoration by people in recovery and families of people in recovery for their relatives and their friends who had lost their lives to addiction. And what I heard there, I will never forget as long as I live. Not just testimonies of lost souls and some with happy endings because they've been able to become rehabilitated and rebuild their lives. But I heard that for many in addiction and in difficult times, it's cheaper to buy oblivion in the context of a handful of street Valium at 20 pence each than it is to heat your home or heat your dinner or survive. And what's wrong in Scotland today and what we collectively have got to change is that far too many of our people have lost hope. And we need hope because we need to know that collectively we will change the destiny of our people and of this country by transforming what is currently crass and gross inequality. And the difference between the haves and the have-nots has never been more stark. And that is what we will turn around with independence when those of us in the majority care about each other, care about community, and are not in it for the privileged few who will benefit dramatically from the decisions made by the Chancellor today. So I support Alec and Alba wholeheartedly because it is Alba who will drive us towards independence, but it needs us to be a united yes movement where we will all gain and make Scotland better for all immediately. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva. Thanks. So I'll pass across to Alec. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. But you can tell I'm the leader of the party because I get the lapel mic. Now, I was just thinking when Eva was speaking there, she was reminding us all of the wonderful portrayal by Rick Mell of Alan Battar as you have to say that very carefully, of course, as a Tory politician. Actually, Alan Battar, as I remember him, would qualify as a left-winger in today's Conservative Party. I mean, he would be expunged from the ranks of government because he was showing too much the milk of human compassion. In the wee summary that I do before the meetings, I was pointing out that if you earn £200,000, then you'll gain £5,000. Actually, it's £5,220 from the combination of national insurance and direct tax cuts that were announced today. If you're on £20,000, you'll gain £167. I'll just repeat that, just so we can work out the full enormity of what's going on. If you're on £20,000 a year, you will gain, your total gain from the combination of tax and national insurance will be £167. And if you're on £200,000, you'll gain £5,220. Now, we're in a church here, but you wouldn't have to be a Christian or of any faith to understand that for thousands of years, humankind have rejected that sort of inequity. So the combination of human progress over the last few thousand years and all the great religions and all the other ethics that have been developed by humanity have come to a conclusion, and Kwasi Kwarteng, who sounds like a villain in a Bond movie, I actually need to get Sean Connery back to sort him out, I think. He actually has the effrontery to stand up in the House of Commons and announce this as a great triumph. Now, of course, as we know, it's quite extraordinary that a Tory Chancellor giving away billions of pounds to their friends in large corporate corporations, in energy companies, in the financial sector, actually gets to a position that even after announcing this enormous giveaway of money that he doesn't have, even after that, the pound goes through the floor and interest rates start to rise. So even the giveaway, for anybody in middle income with a mortgage who's thinking, well, I'll get, maybe £1,000 out of this. Not only will that be wiped out by the increase in energy bills, won't it only be totally undermined by the inflation, they just need to wait for next month's mortgage rates to see it totally swallowed up as mortgages go through the roof and sterling goes through the floor, fueling inflation and impoverishing every working person in the country. So that's the reality. The last time the Tories even approached a budget like this was in 1988, when there was a young member from Aberdeenshire who got up to intervene in Nigel Lawson's budget. Nigel Lawson was having a great triumph. It was the height of Thatcherism. And I got up to ask him a question, which incidentally is not out of the rules of the House of Commons. It's not out of the rule book. You can question anybody in any statement. I mean, mind you, after I was told to sit down and decided not to, that's perhaps more arguable. But the act of asking him a question and saying how could he defend tax cuts for the rich, the poll tax for the poor, and nothing whatsoever for the National Health Service, little did I think that we would still be in the position more than 30 years later, that another Tory Chancellor of another generation of Tories turns the clock back even further in terms of impoverishing working people, mismanaging the economy, and giving what's left of the cake, the borrowed cake, to their pals in the city and the oil companies. Now, I have argued this case for Scottish independence for a long time. And it should be said in terms of people who are supporting it back in 1988. I mean, independence for, a Scottish Parliament for most people was unlikely. An SNP government in a Scottish Parliament seemed far-fetched. And independence seemed out of the question and out of the box. It wasn't even taken seriously as a political idea. So there's been a transformation. But can I say to everyone, as I've been saying on these Alba books around the country, that time is not on our side in these matters. I know that people argue about economics, and the most important thing I ever got told in economics when I was an economist was my boss in Royal Bank of Scotland, when it was a decent bank, once told me, he said, listen, Alec, he said, anything over $1 million is just a big number to most people. And that's absolutely true. Anything over $1 million is just a big number. You can blizzard with statistics. What we have to appeal to, those of us who want to see our fellow citizens get behind this independence cause before it's too late, what we have to appeal to is common sense. We live in a world where natural resources are scarce. Not just gas, which we see this now with its quintupling in price, and not just oil and hydrocarbons, but water. I was in Barcelona a few weeks ago on Barcelona television, on the Catalonian television. I came across a weather map of Europe looking 20 years ago, last year and this year. And it really was quite dramatic, a satellite image. 20 years ago, at this time of year, because it was the same date in August, most of Europe was green. Last year, most of it, bits of it were still green. This year, there wasn't any greenery in that satellite image until you got to about Yorkshire, and Ireland and Scotland. What does that tell you? It tells you that water is going to be an enormously important resource. So we have to think about, as a country, we have a large land area, we have ample natural resources, land, water, oil, gas. We have 5 times as much gas as we consume in Scotland, we produce. Now you might think, given that we've got 5 times as much gas as we consume, how come we're poorer when the international price of gas goes up 6 times? You might think we should be richer when that happens. But of course we don't control our hydrocarbons. We don't control our gas and oil. It's been given away to the international oil companies and to the Westminster Treasury, and will continue to do so and be so until we do something about it. And then there's the next bonanza coming, which Eva referred to. Offshore wind, renewables. Offshore wind is now 1/9. That's, go the other way around. Boris Johnson got himself all confused at his last press conference trying to express this. Let me try it. Gas is 9 times as expensive a way to produce electricity as offshore wind is at the present moment. And the price of offshore wind is coming down. Nuclear, the great new investment of the Tory government, is twice as dear as offshore wind, and it's still going up, as it always does, because they haven't answered the essential questions. Scotland is already self-sufficient in renewables. The only gas station we've got is at Peterhead, which comes on occasionally to boost the grid. So I'll ask the question again, why are we all paying? Why are we to be grateful that our oil and energy bills, our household electricity bills, are only going to double after the energy cap over the last year? Why would we be grateful that the oil and gas producers in the shores around Scotland and the energy providers and those who are providing cheap energy through their sensible investment in renewables are going to benefit to the tune of £100 billion, untouched by the Tory government? Untouched. I mean, you might think that a sensible, rational, a numeric person, I understand the Chancellor was on a winning team in University Challenge. But God help the other teams. I mean, Bamber Gascoigne must have had an off day when he got through. You might think that when you're struggling for cash, you're having to borrow excessive amounts, you're putting pressure on interest rates and inflation and sterling, that you might think, well, maybe we could ask these big corporates, some of whom even volunteered incidentally, we might ask them, maybe, maybe give us half of your windfall gains, or maybe 30%, or maybe 10%, something. Not a dicky have they been asked to pay. I've never seen a country more capable as the UK in mismanaging its natural resource endowment, of wasting the wealth, most of which is in the waters and shores around Scotland. And the contrast, of course, we should make is with our nearest small country across the North Sea, Norway. A generation ago, when I was an oil economist, Norway decided, tell you what we'll do, how we'll tackle international oil, because people said, what's tiny little Norway going to do with the massive oil companies of Chevron, of BP, of Shell? They're going to take Norway to the cleaners. And all Norway did is said, well, actually, through our company Statoil, we want a share in every single oil field. We're not paying for it. That's what you get for your license. And they had a share in every single oil field in the Norwegian sector. And that meant they had information about every single oil field. And that meant they evolved a taxation system where they not just produced more oil and gas, but produced far more benefits for the Norwegian people. And that's why, of course, they now have an investment fund of $2 trillion, the largest investment fund in the world. Now, you might look at me and say, well, actually, that's all over now. Oil and gas, that's finished. Well, I think we've had a demonstration that it's not finished. It's still very powerful. And, of course, it is possible to make it environmentally compatible with the future of the planet. All you have to do is insist that every single license you offer comes attached to a commitment to carbon capture. You don't get a license unless you store your carbon. They'll still drill, they'll still exploit, they'll still produce, and they'll store the carbon. And out of that, we might get the hydrogen economy, which will actually have a clean burn gas, which can heat our homes and enjoy the proceeds. But our point is, the thing that Eva mentioned, the offshore wind, is worth billions. And what did the Scottish government, and it was the Scottish government, the Crown Estates Commission, one of the very few benefits we got out of the vow. Remember the vow? week before the referendum, you don't have to vote for independent. The Daily Record. In fact, Murray Foote, the editor of the Daily Record, who brilliantly as a piece of journalism, disgraceful as a piece of morality, actually produced that, now works for the SNP. So obviously he's had a complete Damascene conversion, now sees the error of his ways, maybe not. But in the vow, it was determined that what Scotland needed was not to vote for independence, but get all these powers without voting for independence. We'd have, as Gordon Brown expressed it, the most powerful parliament in the Western world. Quasi-federalism was what Gordon Brown said. What actually happened is the only thing we got was a squeeze on Scotland's finances and the devolution of the Crown Estate Commission. And I thought to myself, well, that's good actually, because there's going to be a lot of wealth in the hands of the Crown Estate Commission. I had a very uneven relationship with the Crown Estate Commission. They own the foreshores. Some people think like Caledonian McBrain own the foreshores. There's a rhyme in the Western Isles, but actually the Crown Estate Commission have entitlement over the foreshores of Scotland. And they're entitled to charge for licenses for people landing things from offshore. And I thought that's good, because when we get to development of offshore wind, then we'll be able to make sure that at last the people of Scotland will get a fair share of natural resources. And what happened earlier this year? Crown Estates Commission, because unfortunately they, after devolution, they left in charge of the Crown Estate Commission the same toffee-nosed idiots who were in charge of it in the first place. But the guy who just left, I'm sure he was the world's best forester, which was what his profession was. I'm sure he was brilliant at forestry. But how does that qualify you for taking on some of the biggest companies on the planet when you're allocating offshore licenses? I don't know. But anyway, for whatever reason, whether it was his fault or somebody else's fault or the Scottish Government's fault, we ended up giving away the first portion of licenses for a few $100 million. That sounds a lot of money. It is nothing. And crucially, not asking for a share in every single offshore wind field. Because we could produce 10 times our electricity requirements from offshore wind. With a balanced grid, with hydrogen, with pumped storage hydro, we have no difficulty supplying Scotland, and no difficulty exporting that energy to the people that need it. Or even better, we could bring the big users of energy to the power, as opposed to sending the power to the big users of energy. Clean, green, renewable, affordable power for the Scottish people and for Scottish industry. So I think the case over these years, since 1988, since the last unequal Tory budget, has been made, and the logic of it is impregnable. But two things we need to do to ensure success. One is we have to update the case for independence. The world of 2022, as we know only too well, is not the world of 2014. There's been big changes. There's been a pandemic. There's a war in Europe. Brexit has happened. And the case that's explained now must update to look at the world of 2022 and beyond. And that's what this book does, the Wee Alba book. But there's a range of things. I'll give you one example on Brexit. The policy formally of the SNP is to say, right, we're going to get back into the European Union as quick as we can. Now, that's fine, except as quick as we can probably means 5 years. And you've got to think of what you do when you're negotiating independence. When you're sitting opposite people like Kwasi Kwarteng, I was going to say Liz Truss, but perhaps that wouldn't be too difficult. But you're sitting opposite these hard-nosed folk who are impoverishing people at the present moment. You could say, let's say, well, actually, we're going back into the European Union, fine. In 5 years, not so fine. Because that means you're in limbo for 5 years. So we explain in this book that means that we say, right, okay, that's it. Can't find anywhere to go. No safe harbour, let's give up. Well, luckily for us, there's another organisation called the European Free Trade Association, EFTA. There's 4 members, Iceland, Norway, Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Not the biggest countries in the world, but it can't be too bad a place to be, because every single one of these 4 is in the top 10 in the world of wealth per head. Now, merely joining EFTA doesn't guarantee you being in the top 10 in the world, but it can't be too bad a place to be if the 4 existing members are all in that bracket because, well, they've got resources. I mean, Norway has oil and gas and renewables. Well, if only Scotland had oil and gas and renewables. Iceland had fish. If only Scotland had fish. Switzerland has a major international banking system. Well, if only Scotland had a major international financial sector. We've got everything that any of these countries have. And although I've never argued a single time over these last 35 years that Scottish people were better than any other country, I'm damned if I'll say we're any worse. And we have the capability for an ingenious and talented population to put our natural assets and abilities to use. And over a period of time, we'll be as successful as these countries. But crucially, to join EFTA, doesn't it take you 5 years? It takes you 3 months. And when you join EFTA, you've got the opportunity to inherit their trading obligations or treaties with other countries, with the EU, with the UK for that matter, and join in the treaties that they've made with everyone else. You inherit the privileges of membership. That's the place to be in 2022 and beyond. Of course, you might decide at some time in the future to go back into the European Union, of course, but you do it from a position of strength, not a position of weakness. That's one illustration of why the case for independence has to be updated for the modern age, which is what this book has done. Now, this is the 34th meeting that I've been conducting. Obviously, we had a hiatus over the last couple of weeks for good and obvious reasons and paying respect, but we're back on the trail now. And we'll continue to have these meetings, town hall meetings, church hall meetings. We've had them from Skye to the borders, and we'll keep having them because this case is the most important case that any of us will ever hear in our political life. But the last thing is this: how do we get from here to independence? Now, I spent a lot of time, as did others, people like Jim Sowers, Kenny McCaskill, many other people, some people are no longer here, Neil McCormack, hugely talented man. Some people are still here, Winnie Ewing, the redoubtable lady, working out that the way to get to independence from nowhere, back in 1988, was to work to get a Scottish Parliament, because at that time the SNP wasn't very sure that was a good idea, to go through a Scottish Parliament. And then once you got to the Scottish Parliament and gain power in the Parliament, and from that platform have a referendum, and then get independence. And I have to say that it worked right until that last bit. And the vow, and being cheated. But getting a strategy to get to independence was a really good idea. Now that's fundamentally in doubt. And I don't think it's been a great idea to let things lie since the Brexit vote. I think things should have been done much earlier, much harder, much stronger. We are where we are now. And frankly, I think going to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom in Middlesex Guildhall, 2 minutes walk from the Palace of Westminster, is a fool's errand. I can tell you it's a fool's errand. William Wallace would have had a better chance in front of Middlesex Guildhall, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, than you will getting them to say, oh yes, go ahead and have a referendum. We don't need permission to hold a referendum. We need political strength. So how do you get political strength? But just before the summer recess, Kenny McCaskill and Neil Hanby, the 2 Alba MPs, intervened in Boris Johnson's leaving celebration. Intervened. And the Speaker went apoplectic. I mean, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. I thought, you know, he was totally out of order, incidentally. He can't do what he did. But leave that aside. So that dominated that day. And you say, oh, well, that's just one day. Everybody forgets about the next day. Let's say it was happening every day. There are nearly 50 MPs in Westminster who believe in Scottish independence. Let's say every single day of every parliamentary session there was an intervention. And you don't need to intervene by standing up in the middle of the Prime Minister. You can intervene by parliamentary tactics. A guy called Charles Stewart Parnell held Westminster in the palm of his hand in the 19th century. You can play Parnell with Westminster if you've got the political determination to do it. We've never been in a position of almost 50 nationalist MPs. Use the position. Because of all the mounting difficulties of this government, the economic storms, the market sterling plunging, interest rates going up, and all the rest of it, They couldn't even conduct a session in Parliament until they answer Scotland's democratic call. Then where would they be? They would have nightmares about coming into work. So there's ways and means with the political will. Secondly, you don't have to stay in Westminster all the time. We have right now a majority of MPs and MSPs who believe in independence. They should meet as a convention now and take that appeal to the international community, not to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, but to the international courts where we might get justice, who will recognise that Scotland as a nation is entitled to the right of self-determination, whether it's the UN Charter, the Helsinki Accords, or in terms of freedom of expression, the Strasbourg Court in Europe. But the collective will of those who are elected to serve is what represents the sovereignty of Scotland. The sovereignty of Scotland doesn't lie in Westminster, doesn't lie in the Supreme Court, it lies in the elected members chosen by the Scottish people. They just have to exercise it. And in combination with popular demonstration, you have the ingredients of political pressure that will bend Westminster to Scotland's will. So back in 2012, I didn't have any of these things. We had 6 MPs at Westminster. We had a majority in the Scottish Parliament. And David Cameron had through his coalition government, had a majority at Westminster. But he had to bow to agree a referendum. Why did he do it? Well, there's a whole range of reasons why he did it. But the biggest reason was he thought we were going to have our own. If he didn't agree, then we were going to have our own referendum, as he thought, a free question referendum, which were guaranteed for progress. And he thought, well, far better to agree to a single question referendum. So he agreed to a single question referendum, and the Scottish Parliament set the terms and the franchise and the date. But it was a matter of political pressure, a strategy. No matter saying, I'll write a letter when I get a no, I'll say, oh my goodness. Or I'll write a letter when I get a no, I'll go to the Supreme Court. A matter of using the political power and pressure that you've been invested. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it can be done. I only got one mandate for a referendum. One. There's been 4 since 2016. And if we're not prepared to have politicians who exercise that mandate, then we're going to languish and we'll come back. Hopefully I might not come back, but some of you will come back. Not all of us. In 30 years' time, and we'll be saying, my God, that's another Tory budget. This time they've gone for the whole works. You know, nobody earning less than, 100,000 gets to own a house, or whatever. God knows. But we have a choice to make. There's alternative destinies out there. We can either be a self-respecting nation with control of our own resources, with the talent and ability of our population to make a success of our country so we can hold our heads high, or we could be coming to meetings every time the Tory Chancellor has an unequal budget and saying, they've done it now. I prefer the former, because the former is the route to independence and self-respect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alec. That was brilliant. Can I just check before we move on to questions? Does everyone have a copy of the wee blue book? Great. Okay. So we've got plenty of time here, and if we could take some questions from the floor, just put your hand up, and we'll get a microphone across. Would someone be able to? This lady here, and then I'll come across here.
In a nutshell, I think what we have is called social Darwinism. And everything's going to tippy-tippy-top intentionally with leaving the poor, all of us poor, and the environment poor. So it's a cultural issue as much as a political one. The environment and the culture and the steps we're going to take have to be a cultural one to change our hearts. How do we do that? To change the culture, put the information on.
I think it's a very interesting question. I would never argue that Scotland's a perfect, right? We've got plenty of faults. Manifestly, we've got plenty of faults. But I think Burns said, the Hertzai, the Pertzai, that makes us Richter rhyme. And I think the Scottish heart's in the right place. I think we've demonstrated that through history, we've demonstrated that through our attachment to democracy, to popular sovereignty. The Declaration of Arbroath in 1320. What's its importance beyond, us liking to recite a few lines from it? Its importance is the first European statement of popular sovereignty. The very first in Europe. Well, hundreds of years later, some of the colonialists in America, at the conventions, looked for inspiration from the document. George W. Bush and I didn't see eye to eye very much, especially after Iraq, obviously. But one thing he did do, as president, was he designated the 6th of April as Tartan Day in the United States. And when it's supported over here, insofar as we have any reporting in this country, you report a pipe band, marching in New York and Fifth Avenue, as if that was all it was about, And maybe for some people that is what it's about. They go for the spectacle. But the importance of Tartan Day is it's the 6th of April. 6th of April was the day of the sealing in the document of the Declaration of Arbroath. That's why it's the 6th of April, because of the inspiration that provided for people hundreds of years later challenging an unjust, corrupt king and looking for sovereignty and popular sovereignty. Now, it's not a bad thing that we managed to do our bit to invent that concept. It's quite important in the world. We stand for other things as well. We're one of the first countries in the world to have virtual universal literacy. And because of that, people, when I was a lad, my granddad used to give me this booklet about all the things that Scotland had invented. And I was thinking to myself, what's like us, eh? We did this, tarmac car of the bicycle. We did that and all kind of selling. What thing? We must be really, 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 really clever that we invented all these things, and the rest of the world seemed to invent collectively perhaps the same amount, perhaps no. Because the reason we invented all these things is we were one of the first countries on earth, I think Scotland and Bavaria actually, to ensure universal literacy and education for all of the population. And because we educated people, then you had more people who could discover things and invent things and become geniuses. Because other countries were only using that small section of the population that Kwasi Kwarteng was addressing his budget to today. While Scotland was using everybody. Hence the demonstration of Scotland. An American historian wrote a book, Arthur Herman, saying how Scotland invented the modern world. And given it was an American that wrote it, I think we can say, fair assessment. There's some bits in the modern world I'm not so sure about, but nonetheless. So I think the heart's in the right place. There is our national poet Robert Burns is one of the greatest exponents of equality and humanitarianism the world has ever seen. Abraham Lincoln took his inspiration in the dark days of the American Civil War. He had a book of Burns' poetry at his bedside and read it every night to give him strength. So we've made a contribution. We're not perfect, we've got manifest faults, but we have the opportunity, if we choose to handle it, of an enormous platform of resources, our talented population, to actually do some good in this world, further good, if we've only got the sense and sensibility and courage to grasp that opportunity.
So, gentlemen, over. So, I didn't realise we were going to have breakfast.
Do you want me to do that one?
Yeah.
Well, I just couldn't do that just now.
I'd like to ask Alex, you mentioned, you said that time is running out. What do you mean by that?
I suppose I was playing on something that Nicola Sturgeon said not long ago. She said time was on our side. I don't think it is on our side. I think, there's a time and tide in the affairs of people that you've got to grasp. And Scotland's opportunity is now. This is the constitutional opportunity. The majority of the population, we find from the social attitude survey, are now in favour of Scottish independence. It's 23% back in 2013. The day I signed the Edinburgh Agreement with David Cameron, there was a YouGov poll showing support for independence at 28%. I thought it was very inconvenient. The rest of the day was a triumph, and I got this poll, But those two big things happened. One was the referendum experience. And the people who went into that referendum were quite different from the people who emerged from it. Because while some people believed the vow and were conned and taken in and all the rest of it, many others, for the first time, saw the possibility of Scottish independence. That transformed the support. And then, of course, the Brexit gave another boost to the support. Why? Because it was what could an independent Scotland do that Britain couldn't? What is the point of having independence? Well, one thing is it decides whether or not you're in the biggest single market in the world, which is a kind of important decision. So these two things together have taken that support to 50% plus. And I don't pay much attention to the day-by-day opinion surveys. Apart from the fact that lots of them are rigged or rigged by the papers that commission them, because every newspaper in this country, with the exception of the National, is a unionist rag. And they distort the news to follow that agenda, of course they do. But the social attitude survey gives you a good reading of what's going on. Now, if you get to that position of strong public support, but don't then take it to achievement, take it to gains, you allow the Westminster government to chip away at your powers, which is what's happening at the present moment. They've got the Scottish Parliament in a financial squeeze at the present moment by the way they've structured some of the tax changes. If you allow that to happen, and you allow that chance to go by, then I don't think time is on our side. And there's another very obvious reason, that for lots and lots of folk, not me, not many of you, but some of you probably, but for lots and lots of our fellow country people, time is not on their side for this winter, never mind over the next few years. So we've got to a situation where we either go forward or I suspect we'll go back. I don't think politics stands at an equilibrium. You can say this point has been reached and we won't go forward, we won't go back. I think it's one or the other. And the route forward is not as clear as we made it and worked for years to make it. That advantage has been lost, unfortunately. But it can be regained. But you mustn't put yourself in the hands of other people. And the one thing about self-determination, the clue is in the two words, self-determination. It's not the UK Supreme Court's determination. It's not the British Prime Minister's determination. It's not the House of Commons' determination. It's self-determination. And you must never allow the decision to be made by external forces, particularly ones where the game's fixed and the game's a bogey. So we have to recognize that and have something like, I don't care if somebody says, oh no, see that wee bit of that strategy you've unveiled of parliamentary intervention, popular agitation, and the elected convention. That's I think that should be tweaked here and there. I don't mind that. As long as that happens, something like it happens. Because I do know how to marshal political pressure. I spent a lot of time at Westminster. God help me, I know them. I know what they react to. And you've got to understand, it's not just the transient politicians here today, gone tomorrow. It's the whole institution. They've been seeing off self-government movements for generations, for centuries. Delaying, dividing, splitting opinion. That's the tactics. They've got a whole somewhere in the Foreign Office, there's a rule book. How do you respond to movements for self-government, for independence, right? Now, it's well thumbed. Now, in most cases, it hasn't worked. I mean, in my time as a member of Parliament, I probably met the High Commissioner for every single one of the 50 countries which have obtained independence from Westminster since the Second World War. And they were, I mean, it's a huge assortment of countries. Some large, some small, some rich, some poor, some highly successful, some struggling. Enormous range of countries. You know the one thing all these 50 had in common? Not one of them said, we're coming back. No one. So I think we're at a turning point. We either go forward or Scotland will be dragged back into the dark.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to add a bit in there about the urgency of independence and how time's not on our side, and to suggest that the double whammy of Brexit and the pandemic make it ever more vital that we proceed towards Scottish independence with all due haste. I will not be alone in the room for having thought in the course of the pandemic that had Scotland been an independent country and had we had self-determination, a lot of things might have been done very differently. I think that is also the case in relation to Brexit and the European question. Had Scotland been independent, we'd never have left the EU. And what we need to remember really on a daily basis is the impact of Brexit, which Scotland didn't vote for. And it has a huge financial impact, obviously, and there are issues in relation to our ability to trade with the rest of the world, which arise from being out of Europe. And cast your mind back to when Liz Truss had her earlier job, and she made a complete fool of herself on the world stage by talking in the most glowing of terms about British exports, which were going to include Yorkshire tea, jam and muffins. That woman is now running the country. You know, if that's not a lesson on cheese, yes, and pork markets, how could we forget? So, you know, it's easy to say Prime Ministers come and Prime Ministers go, but we're going to continue down a very long, very dark road if we remain as part of the United Kingdom for very much longer. There's much more at stake than simply dignity or common sense or our reputation in the world. Lives and livelihoods are being lost daily, and that position is only going to get much, much worse. And yet, what we know is that the current Tory government are basically quite inept. They look after each other, they look after themselves, they look after corporate interests. They're not interested in the ordinary working man or woman. I would like to think that Scotland is a very different political character than you see in Westminster now. And if we don't get the finger out within a matter of months, then the Scotland that's going to be left for us is going to be the desert that others feared in the past.
A number of people very dutifully filled in their cards, so I think they should ask their own questions. So can I ask Heather McLean, David Henry, and then Kevin, I think it's Gata, to ask their questions, and we'll answer them in an ensemble.
Okay, I said, given the mini budget today,
Yeah.
given the mini budget today, where tax cuts have been given to the top earners, what advice, not that they listen, would you give to the Scottish Government in order to alleviate pressure on ordinary working?
Okay, and then David Henry.
Hi. I've seen a report on France 24 in the last 2 weeks, so I wonder if people are ready for what the French seem to think is coming. The report was about them restarting all their nuclear reactors urgently to generate electricity. The price of electricity at wholesale, according to their minister on France 24, is currently €85 per megawatt hour. The reason they've urgently restarted all their reactors is because they predict it's going to be €1,000 per megawatt hour by 2023. It leads me to believe that the 100 billion that has just been announced by the UK government to try and fill the gap of the current wholesale price is going to be dwarfed by a 12-fold increase. How do we reverse that as fast as possible to protect people in Scotland?
And lastly, in this trio of questions, Kevin, I think it's Gatter? Kevin Gatter?
Yes, hi, good evening. I'm from the United States and visiting here in Scotland, and I'm thinking about your movement in more of an international perspective or international face. What is it that you would like us to know, those of us who are not living in Scotland or in the United Kingdom, to know about your movement? You know, in the US, we don't know very much about Scottish independence, as you all are well aware. We have our own posted issues that we're dealing with over there. But what would you like us to know?
Well, I didn't know you were in the audience, Kevin, but I did a wee bit about the United States and the 6th of April and Tartan and my sole point of agreement with George W. Bush. I think, more than anything else, Scottish independence is not unique, but it is remarkable in this troubled world, in that it's a movement that's been pursued for 100 years. And not a single person, not one single person has lost their life arguing for or against Scottish independence. Everything's been done peacefully, constitutionally. Even our opposition to the poll tax, the non-payment campaign. Well, I don't have to tell an American about non-payment campaigns of unjust taxes imposed from elsewhere. But I'll think about that. I'm not, suddenly, oh, well, well done us, and that entitles us to this, that, and the next thing. But it would be quite nice, and probably a decent lesson in a troubled world, if a peaceful movement for change was to win. I mean, it would be a good lesson in democracy. Scotland's an ancient nation. It's right of self-determination. It's in a voluntary union with another country. And if that country is allowed to unilaterally renege on that voluntary union, which has been accepted more or less by every UK Prime Minister over the last 50 years, even Margaret Thatcher, Scotland's greatest political opponent in living memory, said in her memoirs, Scots are an ancient nation. If the Scots were to determine on independence, no English politician should gainsay that process. Even Margaret Thatcher wouldn't approach what the Tory government are approaching now. It doesn't matter how you vote, doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter what you think. You're not getting it. We're not having it. We're going to keep you fast with the resources. So I would say we ask our American and international friends to respect a movement which conducts itself peacefully and constitutionally, to respect the ancient nation of Scotland and its rights, and to recognise that if these rights are not to be acknowledged internationally, then everything else that's said in the world is so much hot air. Because unless you believe in these things, you don't believe in international rule of law or effective order. That's what I would say. The other thing is that Alba International, which you're free to join, is a very effective organisation. Just arranged a series of meetings for myself and other members of the party leadership with hugely important and influential people who bent a very sympathetic ear to the cause that we're enunciating. When I was First Minister, I had an organisation called Global Scots, which was a way of, mostly economically, of Scots, because there's many of them, as you've probably noticed, in the United States. Some are more Scottish than others, incidentally, thinking about your erstwhile president. But, there's most countries have Scots in extremely influential positions, and we use that economically to help with inward investment and exports. But we're trying to replicate that sort of thing politically in Alba International, because many of the people in Alba, I won't say which international organisation it was, but I was visiting it recently, and I was phoned up by the head of one of the departments saying he was an Alba member. Why hadn't I looked in when I was in seeing them? So that sort of help is extremely important. Now, Heather, the Scottish Government's caught in a vice now. I think that's certainly what I would do, is I would look at the allowances at the bottom end of income tax to give more help to those earners at the bottom through the allowances which they can control. But the top end is a huge problem. Why is the top end a problem, right? Because there's a 1% differential just now, and if it goes to 6%, then you'll see people re-domicile from Scotland to England, and if you're earning that sort of money, you can do it. Just like that. So if we're keeping that, because that's the sort of taxation system we want, it's very difficult to coexist with an unequal system south of the border. What you might want to do is to look at, because I, as First Minister, introduced a range of benefits, social benefits. I called it the social wage in Scotland, where lots of things that other people pay for, like university tuition, are free to Scots, because I thought these things should be beyond economics. Education should be free at the point of need to do some of the things I was talking to the lady about in terms of giving people an educational opportunity. But these things, are paid for. That's part of the social wage. So perhaps we should think about, if you want free tuition, then you have to be within the Scottish tax system. Otherwise, you'll get people who opt out of the Scottish tax system, but will want the free tuition. So that's a very difficult balancing act for the Scottish Government to take. I don't envy them. But the one thing they should certainly do is to give support at the bottom end of the income scale through the tax allowance system. And that they can do. And that they should do. And I think they should do a bit more on the child support as well. But it's not easy because they're caught in a vice. That's exactly why we need independence, because unless we control the resource, you're always going to be, well, it's a bit like Easter Road, kicking uphill. You're going to be kicking uphill in every single decision, and all you're doing is ameliorating. You're trying to cut the rough edges out of a harsh decision, as opposed to creating your own tax system for equality. And the last one, David, a great question, incidentally. I'm very impressed that you listen so avidly to French television and in English. Oh God, you've disappointed me. I was imagining you sitting there practicing your mange two. Yeah, well, it's a simple answer, incidentally. The price of offshore wind is £50 a megawatt hour and falling. And the prices you've quoted, £85 rising to £1,000 a megawatt hour. That's probably true. See, Ofgem, incidentally, who should be abolished, one of the things the Chancellor should have done today is stood up and abolished Ofgem. But Ofgem price electricity on the international price of gas. Despite the fact that we get next to none of our electricity from gas in Scotland, and even England only gets 40%, or roughly 40% of it from gas, it's all priced in the international price of gas, regardless. It's ludicrous, mental, off their heads. It's marginal cost pricing, and it's a formula they've been applying for some years against many people who told them it was hokum. And it is hokum, and it's been proved to be disastrous hokum. But basically, it's the cost of production which should dictate your electricity prices. And we're in the fortunate position that we've got low-cost production coming out of our ears. As I said, a reasonable estimate would be 10 times our own electricity needs. And we should just need to harness that. Now, the question is, do we allow that great bonanza once again to be controlled by international capital, by giant energy companies, or do we do as the Norwegians did with oil and gas, demand a share in our own natural resources? I vote for the second.
Heather, in relation to your question about what can the Scottish Government do, what the Scottish Government could do overnight to assist families, particularly is to increase the Scottish child payment to at least £40 per child per week. That would have an immediate, probably transformational impact for some folk. What they could also do is extend the rollout of free school meals to all children in nursery, primary and secondary school. I think most people here will have seen a headline in the Sunday Herald last week. It was along the lines of a nation divided. The top half of the page was an item about hungry children and hungry mothers, and in particular, one woman who was interviewed had explained that she mainly survives by eating the leftovers from her children's plates. Scotland 2022, mums survive on the leftovers of their children's plates. And this particular lady obviously was losing weight, she was clearly very unwell and was unable to afford to buy herself new clothes that fitted. She couldn't afford to buy a belt and narrated in the starkest of terms, which I'm sure reduced many reading it to tears, that she held her trousers up with the elastic band that she normally tied her hair with. It's simply unacceptable in this day and age, and it reinforces the reason why we say time is not on our side, because that lady will have friends and relatives and colleagues who have similar experiences to her and similar tales to tell. People think that if you're getting what is considered to be a reasonable income from benefit or from a part-time wage, that somehow you should be able to perform miracles, because some folk, especially some politicians, don't understand what poverty actually is and how grinding it is, and the impact of hunger, what that does, what it is to live in a cold house, what it is to not be able to heat your home. And Billy Connolly used to tell the joke about when the priest came to visit his mum and the bairns were up the stairs and they were fighting over the sleeves of the duvet. For some folk, that's not a joke. That's real life again, and it will be this winter for far too many. So the top half for that front page of the Herald last weekend was about want, and the bottom half of the page was about the monarchy. And I see we have a question here about whether or not we keep a monarchy come independence. Independence and the monarchy are two entirely separate and distinct matters. In my book, independence comes first, and there should likely be a referendum thereafter about whether or not we retain the monarchy. But what the performance of the last few days showed was that apparently there was no magic money tree in the past for certain matters, but there was a magic money tree in the past couple of weeks for certain other items of expense, where expense seems not to have been spared at all. So I think that where we've got to now, in the context of what the Scottish Government should be doing and looking after its own people, is that a degree of perspective is required politically by all Scottish politicians in particular, who should remember what it was that they were elected to do, and that was to prioritise independence and get us there by the quickest route. Otherwise, that lady who featured on the front page of the Herald is going to be joined by an awful lot of others who unfortunately will know what poverty is and how grinding it is becoming.
Now, another threesome of questions, all asked together. Firstly, Doreen McCandlish Mackay. Wonderful name, incidentally. But Doreen, please ask your question. There's a microphone that's coming towards you.
As you can see, I've asked when we're going to get independence, and hopefully it's going to be soon. But I've just been thinking about this, Ali. How come when we've had a treaty and an act of union that was supposed to be equal, and it's been many, many times broken, can we not just actually walk away? How can we not? And same with claim of right. The ancient things that make Scots so different. So that's what I'm really looking for.
And one from a similar subject, one from Ellie Ramsey. I think Ellie's here. Yeah, where we are.
Hello, good evening, Alex. As I said on the paper there, I have lost all faith in the Scottish Government. I watch Nicola Sturgeon on the TV, and I find that a lot of people may not agree with this. I find her now grim. There's no passion. There doesn't seem to be any fight left in her anymore, and quite frankly, I despair.
Especially some of them from Catherine. Go back. Catherine's over there.
Thanks very much.
I want to start with Doreen. Claimant rights really interesting. I mean, I was quite struck by Roddy Dunlop, who's the Dean of the Faculty of Advocates, a very distinguished and brilliant lawyer in Scotland, was having a debate with a variety of people about the claimant right. And he said, oh, no, that's ancient history, it's meaningless. And then blow me, at the Accession Council, King Charles III has to swear an oath to uphold the principles of the claimant right. And as I pointed out in a series of tweets, now you can say, as many people would, was bits of the 1689 claimant right that wouldn't withstand modern scrutiny. You know, it was anti-Catholic, for example. But it can't be antique if a new king has to swear an oath to it. Incidentally, I think Charles would have been very wise before he swore the oath to paraphrase, which I'm sure he'd have wanted to do. Say, look, this is not really about religion. This is about upholding the people's will. You see, the claimant right in Scotland, the Scottish history, is not a single document from 1689 or anywhere else. It's a golden thread that stretches through history from the Declaration of Arbroath onwards. And what's behind it is the idea of contractual government, the sovereignty of the people. What was contractual about the Declaration of Arbroath? It wasn't the bit that said, you know, so many as 100 of us remain alive, we shall never subject to English domination, subjugation. That wasn't the bit. It was the bit that said, King Robert's our king, good King Robert. But listen, if he doesn't uphold our rights, we'll get rid of him and we'll get somebody else. That was the crucial bit. That was the bit that said, this is a contract. You're the king, fine. But if you don't uphold the rights of the community of the realm, as it was termed in the 14th century, brilliant phrase. Why did they have to invent the phrase, the community of the realm? Well, they invented it because their king was first in English, then a French jail. King John Balliol, who hadn't proved too successful, Toom Tabart. So they had to find a way to say, what is this thing? It's not the king, it's the whole community of the realm. And it wasn't just the nobles and the barons. Some people say, oh, it's all about nobles and barons. No, it wasn't, eh? What the document says is the nobles, the barons, and the whole community of the realm. They're already mentioned. So they invented this concept. That's what people do when they're in extremis. They invent new thinking. And that's what Scotland did. Much, I think, to the betterment of humanity back in the 14th century. Very handy for America. Very handy for other people through the ages. And that's that thread. And it runs right to 1988, incidentally, when the last claim of right was enunciated in Scotland. A claim of right saying Scotland is sovereign. Scotland has the right to determine the government it wants and the manner of government it wants. And that was signed by every opposition then, Scottish MP, myself included, the SNP and every Labour Party MP, with the sole exceptions of Tam Dalyell of the Bins and Brian Wilson of nowhere in particular. They were the only two. Gordon Brown signed it. Lord George Robertson signed it. Lord George Foulkes signed it. Every single one of them signed it, enunciating the principle of the sovereignty of the people. So the claim of right isn't a single document. And the claim of right isn't a single magic bullet. The claim of right is our statement of legitimacy. That's what gives us the right as a people, as a nation, to determine the government best suited to our needs. That is our legitimacy. And we will not get that upheld in the Westminster Parliament or the Supreme Court. We'll get it upheld in elected politics. So the form and the substance of what we should do is we should use the elected politicians of Scotland who say they believe in independence, demand that they are the convention because they have the elected base. They were elected, they're entrusted. The sovereignty has been passed to them by the people and they have to exercise it. They have to fulfill their job. Otherwise, as the community of the realm said to good King Robert, if you're not prepared to do it, we'll get rid of you and we'll get someone else. So the answer to your question, no mystery. It lies in every bit of our history as a nation, as a country. If they won't do it, get rid of them and get people in who will do it, who'll discharge their responsibility. Now, in terms of what was said about Nicola, I mean, well, my view, what she announced a few weeks ago was not an independent strategy, it's an exit strategy. She's looking for an exit, not an independent strategy. And we have to have an independent strategy. But make no mistake, regardless of who it is, if an independent strategy is announced and unstated, then we'll support it. Alba will support it. There are 2 MPs, the whole party. Name the day. Well, the day has been named for next year, 19th of October, I remember. And you won't have any problems with unity in the Yes movement. Not from Alba, anyway. The only problems with unity in the Yes movement is our lack of belief that that strategy is there. But the answer, friends, to get it there lies in that declaration of all these 700 and more years ago. If good King Robert won't do it, get someone else.
I'm sorry that you feel despair. I felt that too, more than once, and I still do sometimes, depending on developments. And you sit and you watch the telly and you hear the latest announcement and your heart's in your boots again, thinking, when the hell is this going to start going somewhere? You saw the 11-point plan. I don't know what number of that we're on just now, but it feels like about number 1 sometimes. In reality, though, Alex spoke about electoral support and electoral events. But between now and October next year, what needs to happen, quite frankly, and I think everybody here knows this, is that the Scottish Government, the leadership of the SNP, has got to move up a gear and must look serious, and must look far more serious than it does at the moment. That is said, being very conscious that Alba absolutely, completely, totally supports the notion of a referendum next year. We would prefer it to be earlier than October next year, but if it happens then we will be 100% behind it. However, we can only have that referendum if either the Supreme Court authorises it or we're led by a government who are determined to proceed with it anyway. So we have to make sure that the referendum occurs, and we also have to win it. And we're only going to win it if we continue to persuade people around to the independence cause. And we're only going to persuade them round to the independence cause if we sound that we are confident about Scotland's abilities to stand on its own 2 feet. And so sending a letter now and again, or making a wee plea now and again, or standing with a begging bowl, looking like the wee waif in the corner that's a bit clueless and not altogether too sure and hums and haws, is exactly what leads to Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and the rest of them having no respect for the Scottish Government and no respect for SNP MPs at Westminster. What SNP MPs at Westminster should do, as Alec has alluded to, is try some of the tactics of Parnell. Because in everything that's happened in the past few months in the context of independence, the one event that true independence supporters invariably cheer and salute is Kenny and Neil's stand walking out of Westminster. And people at meetings like this say repeatedly to us, why the heck didn't the SNP get up and follow them out the door? Well, why didn't they? A direct challenge to Ian Blackford and his cronies. When are you going to follow them out the door? Because there is absolutely nothing to be gained by going to Westminster and sitting there meekly and mildly talking the talk if you're not going to walk the walk. Walk out the door, you'll get back in again eventually, but show them that Scotland means business.
Can I just say a few words, particularly to your question, Kath, which I think is an excellent, why do you think there is a reluctance by pro-independence parties in power to really pursue independence. Well, in my view, they've become too comfortable. And independence is a revolution, a peaceful revolution nonetheless, but a revolution. And it's not going to be won just simply by playing by the Westminster rules and playing the game of the establishment. We've got to, as has been pointed out by both Alec and Eva, we've got to look at other tactics such as were pursued by Parnell in the 19th century. So unfortunately, and it hurts me to say this because I was a member of the SNP for 3 decades, but they've become the gatekeepers, in my opinion, for devolution. And they're quite happy with the status quo as it is. And in order to move forward towards independence, we need to shake that up.
We've got one more question, which was unsigned. So I'm going to ask the unsigned person who asked a question about the monarchy if they would want to stand up and ask a question, or is it something they want to keep quiet? Come on, own up.
Who was it?
Was it? Okay. Well, somebody asked the question, should we keep the monarchy after independence? So I'll give you my views on the matter. Now, I watched over the last 2-3 weeks this amazing parade of people who came on television, BBC, Sky, claiming to know what the late Her Majesty the Queen's mind was on the issue of Scottish independence. I actually watched a lady in Sky the other night say that the Queen had managed her passing at Balmoral to manipulate the case against Scottish independence. And the Sky presenter, instead of asking why she had this amazing insight into Her Majesty's mind, was nodding away. Aye, that'll be right, None of these people had talked to the Queen about it. But if they ever met the Queen at all, it'd be in a line, saying hello, hello, probably very nervously. I probably spoke to the Queen more about Scottish independence for obvious reasons than any living person. I mean, other people met the Queen a lot more than me, but I doubt very much if Gordon Brown spent most of his audiences speaking to her about Scottish independence. I just doubt that. But I did. And certainly everyone at Balmoral, I think every audience, touched on the subject. Now, in 2011, I went to Balmoral and I made a suggestion to Her Majesty the Queen. And I should say that it's no secret I held the Queen in the highest regard. I admired her before I ever met her properly, and I liked her an enormous amount. That's just the way it is, that's true. Anyway, in 2011, I went to Balmoral, and I had a wee idea, you see, so I thought I would ask for her support. And that was, I had noticed that there was an awful lot of royal birthdays. A multiplicity of royal birthdays. More and more. And in a royal birthday, what happened was, in all the Scottish Government buildings, the saltire flew all the time. And on a royal birthday, the Union flag was put up beside the saltire. And the Union flag, we'll have to understand, is a political flag. The Union flag was devised by Scots King, Jaime the Sack, James I, James VI, devised it as a political instrument. They had a competition. Incidentally, you should see some of the other entries in that competition. They were really duff. But he devised it deliberately, originally as a naval flag. It's not actually the Union Jack, it's the Union flag, it should be correctly termed. But originally as a naval flag, hence the Jack, to try and promote this new entity, which he was now king of. Because remember, Scotland was an independent country. England was an independent country. But James VI wanted a bit more than that, hence the Union flag. So it's a political flag. So for obvious reasons, as the nationalist First Minister of Scotland, I wasn't over-entranced by having the Union flag flying outside all the offices of which I was custodian. Except on Remembrance Sunday and Armed Forces Day. Why? Because that's the flag that people fought under. And you have to respect that, in my opinion. But royal birthdays seem to be a bit much. And I mean, there was like 25 of them, and probably a lot more now. So I said to the late Queen, I said, look, I think, given it's a royal celebration, that we should fly the Royal Standard of Scotland. The line rampant, as people here will know it. And she said, well, First Minister, is the Royal Standard a popular flag in Scotland? I said, ma'am, it's beloved. Of football fans, of rugby fans, all of whom fly illicitly, but all of whom love flying it. It is beloved, ma'am. And she said, well, that's what we'll do then. And that's what we did. And that's what still happens to this day. Now, some people think, probably my successor incidentally, think this stuff's not important. I think it's enormously important. Incidentally, the Queen's advisors weren't too happy. I can tell you the later correspondence was quite fraught. But she knew what she was doing. And she knew what I was doing. Because she was an experienced, intelligent lady. You know, she'd seen every Prime Minister since Churchill. She wasn't going to get bamboozled by Alex Salmond. You know, so she knew exactly what I was doing, why I was doing it, and she knew exactly what she was doing. You see, unlike all of these commentators who never spoke to her about the issue of Scottish independence, I think it's probably true as Sir Tom Devine, probably the one intelligent person they had commentating on the whole thing. Incidentally, the BBC commentary team, did they know what the Royal Standard was? When the Queen's coffin was draped in the Scottish Royal Standard leaving Balmoral, as you all saw, some English historian says, what's that big lion? Well, you could just about forgive him. But the rest of the commentary team, we don't know. They're quickly looking up Google. You know, that's how bad it is. That's how entrenched the ignorance is. But imagine the Queen knew what the Royal Standard was. And she knew what it represented. It was the Royal Standard of Scotland. Because I believe that by, I don't know what, 1977, I wasn't around in 1977. She may have, so Rob Devine says she thought she was an instinctive unionist. That's probably true. But she was also very pragmatic woman who moved with the times. When she was a princess, she had every reason to believe she'd become Empress of India. By the end of her reign, she delighted in being head of a Commonwealth, of which only 15 countries have her as head of state. She moved with the times. And I've got absolutely no doubt that if the referendum in 2014 had gone a different way, if Scotland had voted for independence, she'd have spent the last 6 years happily as Queen of Scots. I've got no doubt about that whatsoever. Now, whether you think it's discharging her duty or whether you think, I think she might have liked it, actually. I really do. That's my opinion, but at least it's an informed opinion. It may be, of course, that in her wisdom, and she had seen them come and go, 15 Prime Ministers, 15 First Ministers of various countries. It may be, she said, well, I'll just spin this boy Salmond a line. Maybe. I don't think so, though. Because that wasn't what was in her eyes. I think she'd been proud to be Queen of Scots. Now that brings us to where we are now. I think, as Eva rightly says, if we're successful in this enterprise and we establish an independent country, then there'll have to be a written constitution. And people after independence will vote on that constitution. They'll vote to what rights they want to see as a country. And one of the issues in that constitution will obviously be the head of state. And my guess is, if you're establishing an independent country in the 21st century, you don't automatically think it'd be good to have a hereditary head of state. And people say, oh, why was it different? Well, it's different because the Queen was there. And she had been there for 70 years of exemplary service. Times change. And I think in that context, I think Alba have got it right, that our argument will be it's time at that stage for an elected head of state for an independent country. Well, I didn't have to, because that's another piece of substantive evidence. George Reid, the presiding officer, and David Steele, Sir David Steele, his predecessor, they asked Her Majesty the Queen if she'd be happy with the term Queen of Scots, which is the historic claim. Robert the Bruce was King of Scots. And she said yes. So I didn't have to. That was, I never referred to as anything other than Elizabeth, Queen of Scots. And they were absolutely right to do so. But then you see, unlike the BBC, David Steele and George Reid also understood their history, just like the Queen did. I think maybe our last round of questions before we wrap up.
Yeah.
How, apart from marching holding banners, are there things that we can do under the law? For instance, we have human rights. And the human rights must have certain voting rights, obviously we do. Why don't the people of Scotland make a collective, one massive Scottish collective human rights vote to the European Court?
Okay. Well, I think that's one aspect. What I think, and as I said, I'm quite happy if people say, oh, we should do that slightly differently. But basically, the bones of a strategy to obtain independence from the position we're in would be as follows. That is the parliamentary intervention day after day after day that I spoke about. That's what Charles Stewart Parnell did to get Irish to the brink of home rule in the 19th century. A much weaker position in many ways than we're in, or the independence movement should be in, with its MPs at the present moment. Secondly, you have to appeal to the international bodies that you're speaking about. You have to enunciate your appeal to the Strasbourg Court, to the United Nations, to demand observance with the Helsinki Accords, all of whom deal with this point about self-determination. It's the idea, incidentally, that the parent country has the right of veto over self-determination. That's been dealt with so many times, but nowhere better than the UK's own legal opinion, the United Kingdom's legal case about Kosovo, where they demolished that argument and said, no, if it was up to the Soviet Union, where the Baltic states would be independent, then nobody would ever be independent. It's a nonsense. And it's been exposed as such. But to have that appeal properly, that appeal has to come, in my opinion, from the elected representatives of the people. They are the people who are entrusted with a mandate, entrusted with the sovereignty, and I said what to do if they don't do it. And thirdly, popular agitation. You're nowhere without popular support. You have to demonstrate the political popular will. Now, these are the ingredients that take you into the position that a Scottish government should demand the mandate to negotiate independence from Westminster. There's no point in us going back to 23 years to when there was no Scottish Parliament. There's a Scottish Parliament, there's a Scottish government. It has to be used. It's in existence. They are the people who should negotiate. If we'd won the referendum in 2014, I'd have negotiated independence for Scotland from David Cameron. Mind you, he'd probably resigned, so it'd be his successor. But it wasn't to be. But that's the body who should negotiate the independence. And the three things that, in my view, are essential are parliamentary intervention, day after day after day, until they're sick of the sight of us. The convention, based on the elected members of Scotland, with, I think, representatives of the community of the realm, civic Scotland. And thirdly, the popular agitation backing that up. And that's how when you go into an election looking for a mandate to negotiate, as I did back in 1992, it's not a majority of votes, it's an election. It's a majority of seats that count in an election. People vote in an election for all sorts of things, but you look at an explicit mandate to negotiate independence. That is a virtually impregnable position, where you have a majority of representatives in Westminster from Scotland, a majority of Scottish MSPs, but there's one vital ingredient without which none of this ever comes to anything, and that is political will. You have to have the will to do it. And I look at this and I look at Scotland, I look at all the huffing and puffing, and I think to myself, how did all these other countries in much worse situations than us, much worse, How did Scotland in the history in much worse situations than we're in? How did they find the political will? But they did, and so can we. But political will is that last vital missing ingredient.
It's no secret that I'm a court lawyer, and if you've got a case going to court, you don't wait for the decision and then decide what your next move's going to be, because you never put all your eggs in one basket. And what we need to have, as Alec has outlined, is a number of different strategies, and they should be ongoing all the time, every day. We should not be sitting on our hands waiting to see what the Supreme Court says. The Scottish Government shouldn't be sitting on its hands waiting to see what the Supreme Court says. Our MPs and our MSPs should be being visited and emailed and called repeatedly, and they should be told day in and day out that we, the people, demand action. We require them to be accountable to us. We elected them over and over again on a mandate to get independence. We didn't elect them to sit and wait for the Supreme Court to say no and then decide what the next step was going to be. So I think that what we, everybody here, should be doing is we should be saying to the First Minister, you promised us in, I think it was January 2020, a constitutional convention. Where is it? There's no reason for that not to happen now. Alex referred to that too. Every Friday from now until the 19th of October next year, every MP, MSP, councillor elected who supports independence should be meeting in Edinburgh once a week to figure out the plan as to how we achieve independence if we're not going to get that referendum, and if we are going to get the referendum, how it is that we're going to persuade people round to our way of thinking. So in terms of where do we go from here and who can do what, the other stuff that we as private individuals have to do is to persuade others of the case for independence. And we have to make sure that our friends, our relatives, our neighbours, our colleagues, our local shopkeepers, the folk that we meet when we're doing the messages, that they are actually registered to vote and that they understand the importance of voting. Now, it's self-evident, you would say, but actually it's not, because we know sometimes if the weather's inclement, as it is inclined to be in October in this country, people don't go out to vote because it's raining, or because they think, oh yes, we'll be so far ahead, my one-way vote's not going to make much difference, I'll no bother, they'll have plenty of votes without me. That's the kind of stuff that folk do say to each other. So I think it's incumbent on everybody who seeks independence for Scotland. Each one of us has to do everything that we can to sell why it is that this country should be independent. It's a natural state for a country, a sovereign people, to be independent. And the reason that we want independence isn't so we can say, yeah, boo, sucks, it's our oil, it's our wind, it's our water, we're away with it now. That's not the reason. The reason that we want independence is to make this country the place we know it should be, where that woman on the front page of the Herald eats her own dinner off her own dinner plate, bought with her own money, and she sees her children being educated. She sees her children being fed at school. She can use the NHS when she needs to. She doesn't need to have conversations with neighbours about getting an appointment for a hip replacement or a knee replacement and being told it'll be 2.5 years before we can get round to you. But if you've got a spare 15 grand, we can do it next week. That's the kind of thing that's happening in Scotland today, and it's wrong. That is not the country that we want, and that is not the country that we should be building. We should be building the country that Scotland should be: prosperous, safe, peace-loving, egalitarian, where folk like me, I was born in 1962 and I lived in a caravan till I was 9, but I got to uni and obviously became a lawyer and watched as others in similar circumstances to me were not so fortunate. I cannot see this country go backwards. I cannot see it go downhill. I want all the children of Scotland to have all the opportunities that I grew up with. Nothing less will do.
I'm just going to pass over to Alec to sum up, but I just want to thank everyone for coming along this evening. I just want to make a couple of points. I was lucky enough to be supported when I went to university when I was 38, and I was supported by my trade union through a trade union scholarship through Ruskin College down in Oxford. Now, when I used to go in as a union rep and speak to the managers, we didn't just go in there and ask, and then when they said no, turned away and went away home again and just gave up. We had to look at other tactics. And that's one of the reasons why I've joined this party, Alba, because I don't believe that just by following the establishment rules we're going to achieve independence. It'll be a peaceful, as I said before, a peaceful revolution, but a revolution nonetheless. But once again, I want to thank you all for coming along this evening. It's been great to see some faces I've not seen for a long time. So thank you and good night.
Well, now I get to wind up for the people watching in Independence Live. So firstly, can we have a vote of thanks for Eva Comrie? And a vote of thanks for the chair. Now this has been the 34th We Alba Book meeting of the series. And the next one is not too far from here in Trinent next Thursday, where that firebrand Kenny McCaskill, who did a marvellous speech in the House of Commons today, will be speaking along with me in Trinent next Thursday. So get along to Trinent if you possibly can. But in closing this meeting, can I thank the people of Dalkeith for making this event tonight here in Dalkeith a very worthy 34th meeting of the Wee Alba Book. Give yourselves a round of thanks.